Thrilled today to welcome each of you to another episode of Authors Speak, an offering for members of our Readers of the Pack LinkedIn group and participants of our Leadership Learning Labs, our way of igniting conversations that matter for leaders and teams. I'm Linda Mall, founder of Accountability by Design. I too am a lifelong learner, as is Eduardo Briceño, our guest author today. His bio is on the screen, and I will give you a shortened version and invite you to visit briceno.com for even more information. Eduardo is a global keynote speaker, facilitator, and program provider who supports organizations in developing cultures of learning and high performance. Earlier in his career, he was the co-founder and CEO of Mindset Works, the first company to offer growth mindset development services. His TED Talks, how to get better at things you care about, and his prior TEDx talk, The Power of Belief, has been viewed more than 9 million times. 9 million times. Welcome, Eduardo, and thank you for sharing precious time with us today. We will share the bioinformation and all of the other content from today after the call on our LinkedIn group. So much of your research, Eduardo, has been focused on the area of mindset. And you are known, I think, as Mr. Positivity based on everything I've read about you. Who has influenced your work the most and why?
Definitely, Carol Dweck has influenced me the most. She has been my mentor for the last 16 years. I got into this work by learning about her work and co-founding with her Mindset Works. And she was on my board when I was CEO of the organization. So she's been doing research on this since the late 1970s. And of course, she's part of an ecosystem. So there's a lot of other people who have influenced me, whether Anders Ericsson, Angela Duckworth, Chip Conley, Ron Rumberger, and many others. But Carol has been the foundation of this work.
Wonderful. And so, what do you mean by the performance paradox? It's such an interesting term.
The performance paradox is kind of the counterintuitive reality that if we're constantly performing, our performance suffers. So often, and this is something that I was doing and I wasn't clear on, is we just feel that a lot of us feel that in order to succeed and to grow and to learn, we just have to work hard. And so if we just work hard, we'll get better and we'll succeed. And what I hadn't realized at some point, and I realized at some point, is that there's two different forms of effort: effort to perform, which I call the performance zone, and effort to improve, which I call the learning zone. It involves going beyond the known and doing things differently rather than just focused on getting things done. And the performance paradox is that if we're constantly performing, our performance suffers.
Mhm. I think I've lived that. I think probably many of the people on this call have lived that for sure. I see smile. What question does the reader need to sit with as they open this book?
Well, I mean, as they open the book, I would think one good question to reflect on is what do I care most about, and what is most important to me, and what might be an opportunity for me to improve on in order to get better at the things that I care about. And sometimes some of the things that we do value, we assume are things that we can't change or we can't improve. That's a fixed mindset. And sometimes we just don't know how, right? So we might think that just by working hard, we'll get better. But thinking about what we care about and what we might want to improve is a question that we might want to think about.
Mhm. Excellent. So, taking this even to the next stage, in the book you state developing different competencies calls for different learning zone strategies. Can you speak to that for this audience?
Sure. So yeah, different skills require different ways to build those skills. So, for example, Anders Ericsson did a lot of research on something he called deliberate practice. And so, if you want to get better as as an athlete, for example, like a golf player, um, you a really helpful strategy is to go to the driving range and and work on a specific sub skill at a level of challenge that's beyond what you can currently do and do a lot of repetitions. Like try something, see how it goes. So the ball might go too much to the right. That's feedback. So we make adjustments accordingly and we try again. Ideally, with the help of a coach who can guide us because the coach knows a lot about how to develop golf skills, right? So if I want to develop leadership skills, I might want to work with a leadership coach who has a lot of things that they can see that I might not be thinking about or that I might not know that are blind spots or skills to work on. And so some of those strategies might be to solicit feedback more or to have somebody observe me how I interact in meetings and give me feedback after the meeting or to read books about leadership. And so yeah, different skills require different learning strategies, and we can always get better at those learning strategies. So we can get better at getting better. That is something that we can also apply our growth mindsets toward.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that feedback process because I think that's the one thing that we drop when we're crazy busy. People forget to take the time to do the review and to reflect on what worked well or what didn't. And what did we want to achieve from that work? And did we get there? And I see teams particularly very much missing that mark and losing the benefit of the learning that comes through that feedback process. So thank you for highlighting that today, because I think it's a huge issue. You use the term learning while doing rather than learning. Is it, I have to look at my notes because I want to
Sure.
get it right.
Yeah.
Learning while doing rather than learning by doing. What does that mean? I
Yeah.
have trouble
So
with it every time.
yeah. So learning by doing is a common term that people say, meaning I I get things done and I learn at the same time along the way. And that's great. That's a good idea. But what we are often not clear on is that if we just do, learning doesn't follow automatically. And so if we say learning by doing, people can get confused because if we just do, we think we'll get better. But that actually only works when we're novices. When we don't know much about something and we just try to do it, we'll learn a bit and we'll get better because we're so bad that just trying to do something, we'll learn something kind of naturally and we'll know that we have a lot to learn. So we'll experiment. But then once we become proficient and we just do, then we stagnate. We don't continue to get better. But we can kind of get things done and improve it the same way at the same time. And that is probably the biggest opportunity for most of us, rather than spend, an hour doing deliberate practice, which a lot of us might not feel we have the time for, or it might not be the right strategy for the things we want to improve. A lot of us are getting things done. We have a lot of things to get done. So the biggest opportunity is to figure out how can we get those things done in a way that's also going to lead to improvement and innovation. And to do that, we have to change, right? Sometimes we approach each day the same way we approach the prior day. So without change, we can't have any improvement. So we have to experiment, tinker. We have to solicit feedback. When things surprise us and when things don't go the way we expect, we have to think about that and reflect because we don't learn from experience or we don't learn from mistakes. We learn from reflecting on experiences or mistakes. So those are things that are different from just getting things done. But we can, learn while doing. We just have to be deliberate about it.
Yeah, I think it's that deliberate practice always, right? And the reflection that comes afterwards too. That's such a strategy from every single leader. So the question that I really get excited about asking because it's near and dear to the work that I do is you encourage readers to promote belonging, trust, and collaboration. all of which are near and dear for me, as everybody on this call knows. From your perspective, what is the single most effective way leaders can do that with some ease?
Well, first, I think that's really critical because we can learn a lot, both learn and perform a lot better when we're doing it in collaboration, sharing our thinking with each other, um, rather than do it in isolation, right? And I think collaboration and learning are the two greatest human superpowers. We would not have survived without collaboration, or without learning. And so, but in order to do that, to share our thinking and to collaborate, we have to have trust with each other. We have to trust that if I share ideas with you that might or might not be good ideas, you're not going to take that against me and use that against me, against other people to put me down, for example. Or if I share a mistake with you so that we can think about what can we learn from this mistake, that you're not going to use that against me. Or if I'm vulnerable and I say, hey, Linda, I would like to improve at this particular thing. What are your ideas? You're not going to turn around and say, hey, this person doesn't feel competent in this particular area, right? But rather we're thinking that we can all continue to improve in any area, and that's part of what we do together. So to your question about what is one single thing that a leader could do, I would say kind of setting the stage and making the implicit explicit. So by setting the stage, I mean, sometimes we come to work and we assume that other people think the way we do, that other people think that they know it's obvious that we want a positive work environment where people are collaborating, where we're sharing ideas, where we're not going to use information against each other, and that's obvious. And so we don't make that explicit to other people, and that's called the false consensus bias. It's a human bias where we think that other people think like us, and so we tend to we need to make our assumptions explicit to other people, saying, here's the type of relationship and work environment that I value, that I would love for us to have. What do you think? What do you value? Does this resonate with you? And what does that mean? Does that mean that we solicit feedback? And when do we solicit feedback? And how? And how do we want the other person to respond? And so you get in the same page, and that fosters trust in one another. A sense of belonging can be fostered by elevating the things that we share in common. So, for example, our mission is something that we share in common, or our devotion to our customers, being customer centric, is something that can bring even different functions within a company together as part of the same in-group.
Mhm. It's interesting because I think without that trust, you can't have collaboration because it's not safe to say what you want to bring to the table. And without collaboration, you can't have that creativity you talked about just a little bit ago. So it feels like a building block of competencies or skills. Yeah. So when you think about the work you've done so far around mindset, how do you set that learning mindset in your brain every morning before you start your day? How do you get that mindset?
Well, so I think a very powerful strategy that I use is to remind myself every morning of what is one thing that I'm looking to improve on and how, so that we're making we're making change proactive rather than reactive, right? Sometimes we think of growth mindset as, if I make a mistake, then I can learn from it. But and that's great, but that's a lot less powerful than, I am making my own change the default. I'm always going to continue to change and drive that change. And so, what is that one area where I'm proactively improving, and how am I going about it, is one of the things that I kind of remind myself of every morning. I remind myself of other things like, what I care most about, what my strategic priorities are. But that is one thing that then primes our intention to continue to evolve ourselves, and what that and helps us kind of bring those thoughts up to mind more frequently during the day. It helps us notice more opportunities for improvement during the day. So it primes a growth mindset, it primes the learning zone. And what happens is, it becomes easier and easier for the brain to activate those networks of neurons that are focused on improvement so that, it becomes more and more automatic as the way we live and work.
Okay, thank you. And I just have one more question before we put it out to the group. I'm sure some others have questions. And I'm going to ask them just to raise their hand when they do. But I want to ask first, what's ahead for you? So you've done some amazing work. I personally am such a fan of the book. It will be one of our leadership learning labs coming up. I think the content is practical, relevant, and timely. So I just am a fan. So I wonder what's ahead for you in 2024, 25. What comes next?
Sure. So, I mean, the main thing is the core work I do is I'm a public speaker. I help companies build cultures of learning and high performance. So I do a lot of keynotes in leadership offsites or company offsites where people want to introduce these ideas to them. And I'll continue doing that and getting better at that. And in particular, I want to get better at kind of some of the virtual tools that I use when I'm doing virtual sessions. Aside from that, I'm working on an app that I'm very excited about. It's a digital flashcard app that helps people consolidate information that's important to them into their memory. And then finally, I'm interested in exploring ways to support companies more deeply because a lot of what I do right now is events, and I love that. And usually, companies have internal champions that are doing an
Mhm.
initiative, and this is part of that initiative, and that's wonderful. But I want to explore whether there are other ways that I can support that initiative more beyond the event.
Okay, excellent. Lovely. Well, I'm cognizant of our time and I promised the audience time to ask questions. So, and I see Queen Ada has a hand up, or is it Kathy? I can't tell. Who has a question right now? I'll just let you speak right up. No question.
I have a question.
Okay, go for it.
I'm just around that the vulnerability, and I feel like there's just a lot of fear around being vulnerable. And I wonder, in your perspective, for someone who's sort of in middle management, and how do they sort of manage up to build that sort of trust and build that vulnerability so that they can have those conversations, those complicated conversations without feeling that fear. If that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah. So first, I think that I want to make a distinction between the word vulnerability and transparency. And so ideally, in a very strong positive culture that's very strongly kind of learning oriented and performance oriented, we people can be transparent without feeling vulnerable, meaning without feeling that they're open to harm. That if I share information with you, you might use it against me, right? And so ideally, we want to be transparent whether or not we feel vulnerable. Now, at the beginning, at the beginning of the culture building process, we don't know how other people are going to respond. And if we share information with them, they might use it against us, or they might dislike us, or they might, start retaliating. And so then we might feel vulnerable when we're transparent. And so how much we share and how is something that involves judgment because we might be harmed, right? If other people don't have the same understanding that we do. And so one thing that we can do is set the stage, meaning, what are the company values? Is it clear? Are we making the implicit explicit in terms of how we want to work together? What kinds of conversations we want to have, whether we want to, solicit and receive feedback. And so depending on where your organization is, depend on that, right? On how clear the organization has said this is how we want to behave with each other, then you can leverage that clarity and that alignment and saying, hey, what do we mean by this? Are we really on board with this? What does this mean? And then when you have those conversations, you can refer back to those things. And if people don't respond in those ways, you can refer to those things and say, hey, here's what I understand by this. What do you understand by it? The other thing we can think about is depending on how exposed you feel at the beginning is taking smaller risks at the beginning, right? If you feel like it can be really high stakes, taking smaller risks, seeing how people respond. If they don't respond in an appropriate way, then having conversations, but perhaps not sharing everything from the onset if you're not sure and if you feel like the people might retaliate. What do you think?
That's a really good tactic. Thank you. Because I just a side comment is that there's a lot of conversation always, and a lot of people do a lot of talking about what's kind of should be, but then no one's actually doing the doing part, and it's all this talk. So there's this conflict between what I'm hearing and what's actually they're actually doing, and so it makes it complicated, if
Yeah.
you know what I mean. So
Yeah. And I
navigating
wonder,
is a little bit.
if there's a lot of talking but not doing, if there could be a space for you to share that thinking with others and say, hey, I see us talking about this, but I don't see a lot of us actually doing it. Do other people perceive that? What do you think about that? I don't know.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Take that away. Appreciate that.
No, but
It,
it's definitely an art, not just a science. Yeah.
it comes back to the book that's actually about turning the power of our mindset into action, right? It is, how do we make that happen? How do we take that, make that change, take that step? So does anybody else have a question for Eduardo right now? I think we're right at 20 minutes, which is what I committed to and what Eduardo committed to from his time perspective. Do we have
Linda, I'll just add, great conversation. And it feels to me like that whole idea of being deliberate that you talked about earlier, Eduardo, is so important, because it's so easy for us to fall into our old habits. And so if we're deliberate about the change that we want to make, the positivity and the performance goals and all that, and that culture building, we've got to be deliberate about it. And it really is, it's got to start with people at the top.
It is so much, I agree, Barb. It is so much easier and more effective when it starts at the top. I think it can also start anywhere, wherever we are, but when it starts at the top, you can get there so much faster because people at the top have the power, right? And so if they are clear and if they model the way, if they're transparent, if they share how they're looking to grow, if they solicit feedback, then they make it safe for other people to do the same. The organization can get there a lot faster. I completely agree.
Yeah, because people are watching. People are watching the leaders with a magnifying glass, and if they do something a little bit off, the credibility of that beautiful vision and statement and values just, it doesn't mean anything.
Yes, and often, leaders think they're modeling learning to a much greater extent than than they actually are. So when I ask people, like senior leaders and people who report to them, to what extent do senior leaders in this organization model learning? The people at the top feel that they're doing it a lot more than the people who report to them say. And that's because we think that other people are interpreting our behavior in the way that we think they're interpreting it. So we're saying something and we think it's obvious to other people that we're modeling behavior, but that's not coming across that way. So we have to communicate a lot more than we think we need to. We have to be explicit a lot more than we need to be explicit, and open the door for other people to give us feedback, so that those blind spots, people can say, hey, like, here's a disconnect that I'm seeing, and you can start those conversations in a safe way.
Excellent. Great comment and great response, Eduardo. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, then can I ask one more?
Yeah.
I didn't ask it earlier. It wasn't on the list of questions that I sent to you to be for the conversation, but I can be pretty intense about work I'm doing, and I can completely lose myself in that work, and I can push hard to get to the finish line. It is it's part of my natural DNA, I think, to just do it, get her done. And so how do I interrupt that before I get too far down that rabbit hole? Like, is there one technique I could try that would interrupt that intensity I feel when I get caught up in something I love doing and I want to push hard to the finish?
Well, I relate. I also I love my work and I get lost in it. And a sense of flow is something really beautiful and very effective. So that sense of getting
Mhm.
lost in what we're doing is a wonderful thing. I think one thing to think about is when we take on challenges of doing something that we haven't done before, that we can get lost in the work in a way that we have to discover, right? We have to take risks, we have to experiment because we haven't done things before. So
Mhm.
in taking on challenges of things that you haven't done before, and then getting lost in the work and knowing that you're going to need to experiment, you're going to need to research, you're going to need to ask for feedback, then you can be learning while doing along the way.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. So it's okay.
It's okay. I think it's a
That's what I
wonderful
heard.
thing to, but it's a wonderful thing to get lost and to feel a sense of flow.
Yes.
And if it's not working for you, like if you reflect and you say, "Oh, this is not working for me because
Mm.
I'm spending too much time doing these things and not enough time doing these other things that are important to me," then how do I get better at prioritizing my time and
Balance.
using my time? Then that's a question that you can act upon and think about, well, maybe like I'm going to do this strategy or that strategy if it's creating a problem for you. But if it's working for you, then that's a wonderful thing.
Thank you. Thank you. One last opportunity to ask a question. And if there are none, I will just close this. Melanie, I see you
I
went
did.
off mute.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do have a question. And it's kind of around your journey to public speaking. So I saw that you had some comments online there around, how you kind of ventured into that space. And so I wanted to know what mindset you had to have in order to make that transition to kind of do that TED Talk that you had to fill in for Carol and kind of own it and transition through that uncomfortable space.
Yeah, that was I didn't have a plan to be a public speaker. Wouldn't have thought that I would be good at it or that I would enjoy it. And something that helped me at that time is that the first talk that I did was it was a TEDx talk that was only going to be 10 minutes. And so I thought I could memorize a script. I could work really hard to to put together a script that was powerful with feedback from Carol and from other people, to memorize it, to practice it. And I thought I could get into stage, even though I would be really nervous, and I could just say those words for 10 minutes and I could try to take on that challenge. And one strategy that I use, for example, is I didn't look at people's eyes because I thought I would get too nervous and start thinking about other things, what they were thinking, how it was landing. And so I looked at the wall at the back of the room or the lights instead of people. So I had different strategies like that. When I practiced, I had like photos of people in front of me to just like feel like I was talking in front of people, which made me very nervous. Um, and so that was easier for me because it was not a conversation. Like in my keynotes, I'm doing interactive conversation with people now, and I like it. Like here, we are having a conversation. But I thought that because I could, it was something that was going to be highly planned. It was only 10 minutes. Then that was a good way for me to get started. It was a challenge, but it was a challenge at my zone of proximal development. So we want to not go from 0 to 100 if that might be too far. Oh, unless it's okay to fail, right? And it was going to be okay to fail, but it was going to be, failing online in a video online. I wanted to try not to do that.
Other
And I
place.
wanted to take the opportunity to promote the idea, right? And so it seemed like a challenge outside my comfort zone, but one that I could test to see if I could succeed at.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I see Kathy's online with us now. Lovely. You've landed. I see both you and Greg were in your cars traveling today, so I appreciate you making the time. Yeah. Any questions, Kathy, or comments?
I do have one question. Talking about sort of how do you set yourself for the day and setting those intentions. I'd be interested if you had a practice that you had in the morning that started your day that maybe others might find helpful?
Sure. I think my practice at the first thing in the morning is my most important habit because we haven't been distracted by anything at that point. I do that before I turn on the phone or check social media or email. And the first thing I do when I'm in bed, and it's the most important thing I do every day, is just express gratitude for the things that I deem most important. And that is, life, health, love, and peace. They're the things that are present of those things rather than things that are absent. So a lot of things during the day is going to draw my attention to war and hate and conflict because our brain tends to go more toward the negative, and there's incentive for social media and the news to get clicks, and those are the things that get clicks. And so I need to pay attention to the things that are positive there. And also that helps me put all the other things in perspective. So if I struggle with a TEDx talk, that doesn't feel as end of the world because, that's not what's most important. But to your question, once I start I'm ready to start my work day, then I go through like a document where I remind myself of a few things. And I generate those things rather than recognize them. So rather than read my missions, for example, I have like my missions are, and then I just say what those missions are from my mind rather than reading them. Because when we generate our ideas from inside our mind, it's a lot more powerful. And then those ideas can come to mind a lot more easily during our day. So those are kind of some of the practices that I use in the morning.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, powerful. And Quip, I see you had your hand up. You had a question, and we have to condense this now because we've kept him past time for sure.
Yeah.
But interesting.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. And my name is Ada. Quip Queen is because of the talk show I have. But that's fine. So, when you started, Eduardo, thank you for spending time with us. You said that we can get better at getting better. Yeah. And, I love Quip, so I held on to that very closely. But my question is, who determines whether or not I'm getting better?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, it is you who is driving your own growth, right? But you can get information from other people, right? Like the feedback from other people is super, super helpful because as social animals, most of what we are doing or we want to do is have an impact on other people, and so often, what we are trying to do is have some sort of impact on other people. Getting information from them is super, super helpful for that. They can also observe us from a different vantage point. They have different skills and backgrounds, so they can give us. So, we can get information from different people. We make assessments based on that. And based on our reflections and our experiences, and then we make choices. But I think at the end of the day, we're the ones who need to make the choices about what we want to improve and whether that's working for us or whether we want to try something different. What do you think, Quip? Oh, Ada? Is it Ada?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I believe it's a blend because there are people who are wrong and they're sincerely wrong. Yeah. And sometimes we delude ourselves. So I agree that feedback is a gift, but in receiving feedback, we also need to determine which feedback to discard because that could take us off the path. So,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would add to that to say, I think most of us are our own worst critics. So if I can measure up to my standards, I probably can measure up to somebody else's. I'm not sure who else is like that, but so yeah, there are faces and smiles. So thank you, Eduardo, for your time, for your precious wisdom, for sharing some of the information that's actually in the book. And it's a great teaser for all of us to read it again if we haven't already read it, or to read it for the first time if we haven't already. It's a study book for me now as I build learning into everything, every part of my day, because time is short as you get older. You have to do everything faster, right? So thank you. Really appreciated you taking the time. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our upcoming Leadership Learning Lab, which is a version of an old-fashioned book club, but it actually is designed for reflection, conversation, and a commitment to action and celebration of that success. So the information is on the slide. We're going to share those with you in the LinkedIn group and individually if you want it, just ask. I don't want this to be a marketing for us. I want it to be all about Eduardo today because he has been our gift in this session. So thank you, Eduardo. And if anyone wants to post how they felt, questions, ideas, thoughts in LinkedIn, give Eduardo applause, please. Take the time to do it. Check out his site, Briceno.com. And I'm going to stay online. If anyone else wants to stay on and have conversations, share your thoughts, we're here. But thank you, sir, for your time. It was great.
Thank you, everybody, for the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Eduardo.
Have a great day.
Take care.